Shots fired. That's what happened in Davos last week at the World Economic Forum. A war of words erupting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump. And it's still going. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. I'm Brian Lilly, your host. Normally, speeches at Davos don't make news, except for those people who are obsessed with the WEF or people laughing over the silliness of some of the things said on those stages. When Mark Carney took the stage last Tuesday, he delivered a speech applauded around the world because it took direct aim at Donald Trump and the United States, even if he didn't name them.
We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. But we believe that from the fracture, we can build something bigger, better, stronger, more just. This is the task of the middle powers. The countries that have the most to lose from a world of fortresses and a most to gain from genuine cooperation. The powerful have their power. But we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, to build our strength at home, and to act together.
Your mileage may vary. I wasn't a fan of the speech. I find Carney's pattern of fawning over Trump in person and sniping at the American president when he's in front of other world leaders to be juvenile and tiresome. Pick a lane. Trump clearly saw or heard Carney's speech, and the next day, in response, Trump paused while talking about the need to acquire Greenland for the Golden Dome to take his own shots at Carney. And unlike Carney's veiled comments about Trump used Carney's name, his first name.
We're building a Golden Dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us, by the way. They should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements.
That, of course, led to Carney giving a further response.
But Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian.
There have been several comments from cabinet members in both governments over the past several days, lots of pundits weighing in, and no end of thoughts at the local coffee shop. And after we recorded this last Friday, the American president spent the weekend on Truth Social talking about Canada, China taking over Canada, and the fact that he would put 100% tariffs on our country if we sought a free trade agreement with China, something the Carney government made clear they're not looking to do. So as I said, prior to those comments, I was discussing this with Stuart Thomson, Parliamentary Bureau Chief at National Post, and National Post columnist Tasha Kheiriddin. They are the duo behind the Political Hack newsletter. All right, so Stuart, Tasha, I guess this latest political war, started with Mark Carney in Davos, snowballed from there. But this was one crazy week, wasn't it?
I think it is. And if you are Mark Carney and you were thinking about maybe having to go to the polls sometime in the near future, I think actually a war of words with Donald Trump is the kind of thing you need in your life right now, right? So I'm not going to say that Mark Carney did that speech purely for domestic politics reasons, but there is certainly a happy coincidence there that Donald Trump is mad. He's tweeting about us at 9 o'clock at night. And that's kind of a throwback to the time when that was really benefiting Mark Carney. So I think that Donald Trump enjoys this. I think Mark Carney enjoys this. And I think if you're Pierre Poilievre, you're probably thinking, well, here we go again.
Well, and if you're a senior in Victoria, you're thinking about how do I get my hands on a rifle to go and defend Greenland? Because I'm sure you all saw the letters to the editor. I'm glad that you pointed that out, Stuart, about how, potentially an early trip to the polls. Tasha, I got this text from the Liberal Party. Together, we're choosing to build a future that is better, stronger, and more just. Watch Mark Carney's speech, and then a link in the text message, and then add your name if you agree, and a place for me to go and give them all my contact data. Seems like a campaign already, no?
Well, actually, I felt that Carney's speech in Quebec City was more of a campaign speech than what he did in Davos. Davos, to me,
Land soaked in blood?
No, Davos to me was setting the record straight and telling it as it is, which speaking what other people were not saying, which is the world order has changed and there's no going back, and it's unpredictable. And thanks to he who shall not be named, i.e., Donald Trump, and it was done for a number of reasons, potentially also for a domestic audience. Don't disagree, but I think that the speech, the follow up to it, that was where I started to say, the Quebec City, talking about the shared values, and not only that, but going in this long litany of Liberal accomplishments in his view, and what the Liberals intend to do going forward. So that was really, to me, setting groundwork for a potential campaign. And I think that, look, if Carney doesn't get a majority with floor crossers, he would be well positioned to do exactly this, go to the polls before the Kuzma negotiation deadline comes up, because if he doesn't have a deal, then, well, that will be really hard to win at that point. So I think he's got one of two paths here if he wants to get a majority government, and I think he's planning for both.
I've been talking to Liberals who have said that if they don't get a majority by floor crossers, that yes, a spring election is definitely a possibility. And then listening to that, and of course, it being in Quebec City, he opened mostly in French, and it was very nationalistic. He was talking about the Plains of Abraham. He was talking about land soaked in blood. He was talking about Wolfe and Montcalm, about the choices that we made to be a separate country. This seemed very much campaign-like, and my view of foreign speeches by prime ministers is that they are as much, or if not more, about the domestic audience than they are the foreign one, because we pay more attention when prime ministers give a speech on foreign soil than when they give them at home. When they give a speech at home, it's like, okay. Oh, you're off in another country saying something. I guess we should pay attention. It's important now. And so this was setting up the me versus Trump vision for a campaign. If it comes, it may not come, but if it comes, in my view, that's what he was doing.
Now, can I just say, as sort of a side story to this, it was nice to hear a prime minister talk about our history like he wasn't embarrassed about it. So hopefully that era is over. But
I'll agree with you on that.
Yeah,
I was just walking the Plains of Abraham a few months ago. It was great.
And I think the other thing to take note of in that speech is the Canadian values stuff. And you can just see it on campaign slogans, a Canadian values election. Like, I do think that when you're in a minority parliament, you probably want to be ready no matter what. And that would be smart for the Liberals, even if they weren't planning to go sometime soon. And I do wonder if maybe Poilievre's rhetoric has maybe fallen into a trap a little bit here, because Carney got those floor crossers. And I think Poilievre said what was on the minds of conservatives, which is that this feels like an illegitimate way to get a majority or even to push towards a majority. And if you're Carney, you could say, look, the opposition leader says that what we're doing is illegitimate. He says we need to go to the polls and ask voters if we deserve this majority. So we're going to listen to what he says, and we're going to do that. So I wonder if you're Mark Carney, the one thing you need is that flimsy pretense for why you're going to the polls. You could use the Doug Ford excuse, which is that I need this to battle Donald Trump. Somehow this will help me battle Donald Trump. But if you're Mark Carney, you can also use that justification that Poilievre has already given him too.
Tasha, in my view, they don't need a justification to go to the polls because they always invent one. That's, what's my old line about politicians? You don't blame the scorpion for stinging you. It's what they do. They find a reason to go to the polls. Justin Trudeau, in one of his elections, I think it was 2021, spent months blocking everything from going through Parliament himself, and then turned around and said, Parliament's dysfunctional. I need to go to the polls. Well, you're the one blocking everything from your own government. He won still. It didn't matter. People still said yes.
Yeah, I think that Carney, though, I do take Stuart's point. It is a convenient way to address that conservative objection, which not just conservatives have made, others have made too, that minority just by floor crossing is not as legitimate as a minority won at the ballot box. So he would address that. I think what he's setting up, though, if he's setting up for an election, is sort of an election of unprecedented times, i.e. things have changed. The U.S. now is really anti-us. And I think also the other piece in here is the Alberta separation referendum. That is going to be a major test of Canadian unity. And we're seeing Albertans line up to sign petitions, but we're also seeing U.S. interference online. And it's going to amp up, you can believe it, in this. This is a perfect foil situation for Carney. It's coming this spring. And it puts Poilievre in a real box because both men are Albertan, ironically, but Poilievre is elected in Alberta. He's going to have to face a conservative electorate. UCP, 60% of them think that separation's a nice idea. So it's going to be really tricky for him. So all these winds are blowing at the same time, and Carney's like just surfing them right now and thinking, great time to have an election. I'll be the only one standing up for Canada.
I didn't think that they would be able to turn a potential spring election, which is what we're talking about now, into another referendum on Donald Trump again. Somehow they've been able to.
Never underestimate Donald Trump.
Well, I think it's a combination, and I'd like to hear from both of you. I think it's a combination of Carney and Trump. This war of words that kicked off in Davos started with Carney. He had just come from China and Qatar, and then shows up at Davos after praising leaders in both China and Qatar, is saying that the United States is the big problem in the world, which doesn't have the same ring when you've just been saying how great a leader President Xi is. It doesn't have the same ring when you're like, well, we need to have a strategic partnership with China, the guys that, kidnapped our own people for 2 years. But there's an awful lot of the Canadian public just so angry about the United States and Donald Trump that they are all in on this.
Yeah, I said earlier that it may have been a deliberate provocation from Carney, but I do also think I agree
think it was.
Yeah, and so there is this world we now live in where if Trump says something, hostile to Canada or something we just profoundly disagree with, the Greenland stuff is a good instance of this. I think every world leader has this question of, do I go out there and say what I think and what is the position of my country and risk some tariff or something that would never happen if I didn't do that? Do we actually stand on these principles? Is it actually worth it to go out and say this? It probably doesn't make any difference in the long run. And I think that is a hard thing to do for 4 years, is to sort of hide and try to just cower under some coats and hope it all goes away. So I think Carney was kind of getting at this big question for the middle powers, and his solution is for them to band together. So I think the substance of his speech was... it wasn't delusional. It wasn't something outside of the reality that Canada lives in. And I think he was trying to toe the line of not angering Trump too much because he didn't mention his name. He just kind of left it quite clear that that's who he was talking about, because we know that Trump probably has a Google alert for his name, and maybe you can avoid that.
Don't you?
Of course, I'm a journalist. We understand vanity in this industry. So I think
I don't for mine, by the way. We go off too often.
I do understand the question that all these middle powers are facing, and I think probably every Canadian has a different line of, are we really going to accept a 10% tariff on Canada just because Carney felt like he had to speak up to Donald Trump? I think most of us would say, just keep your mouth shut. And I think that's probably the line he's dealing with right now. And then there is that incentive for Carney, which is always going to run against the interests of Canadians, which is that when Trump's mad at him, it helps him out electorally. So there's a lot to untangle here.
So, Tasha, as our resident Carney whisperer, help me understand then. He didn't say much about Venezuela and going in and arresting Maduro, which I actually think was a good thing. He didn't say much about Greenland ahead of time. So why did he do this Václav Havel, power of the powerless, America is the evil hegemon speech at Davos?
Well, I think that I disagree that it was necessarily just Carney who started this. I think Carney seized a moment. Over the weekend, a couple of things happened. First of all, there was a lot of activity online calling for Alberta/Canada to be the 51st state. That amped up over the weekend. Steve Bannon was out there on a tear about Canada. So there was already this conversation brewing about Canada, again, in that context, which we know stirs nationalist sentiments here. And then Donald Trump sent out his little missive about Greenland and the Peace Prize to the Prime Minister of Norway, saying that he was mad he didn't get the prize, and this is tied into why he wants Greenland. And I think that was a real jump the shark moment for a lot of people. I mean, Trump says insane things a lot, but that one was, somehow it hit home because I think people realized that, you know what, no matter what we do, there's no point. There's no point with this man because he will change his mind whenever he wants, do whatever he wants. And it is about ego as opposed to anything really rational. And yes, he's very much against China, and that's a good thing, holding the Chinese influence at bay, and he's done some good things in the world. But there's always a subtext of what's in it for me, even with Gaza. I mean, look at the Trump Gaza plans that Jared Kushner unveiled in Davos. Giant towers looming over Gaza that presumably the Trump empire will build. I mean, it's insane. So it's self-interest. So
I agree with Howard Anglin. They're ugly buildings.
They are ugly, and the crazy thing is that this is presented as a legitimate action for this board of peace. It's a board of grift. That's all it is. It's a great grift. So I think at that moment, Carney felt probably very comfortable saying, you know what, this guy's nuts, and there's no point, and let's just band over here and leave him alone. I didn't see Carney's speech as an endorsement of China per se. I think, and I hope it's not, because I think that would be a mistake of relationships with them. I think it's more the middle powers have got to get their act together, and we as a country have to have more friends. And those friends will be more reliable friends. And he's right. He's not wrong to say that.
Do you think he's right to say that China is a more reliable partner than the United States?
No, I said middle powers. I didn't say China. I don't think, like I said.
No, but Carney was specifically asked about that.
Yes.
In Beijing. Is China more reliable and predictable partner for Canada than the United States? And he didn't say yes directly, but he answered in a way that was a yes.
Well, Melanie Joly said yes. Melanie Joly said it was. She was the one foaming off about that.
I think that's why the New York Times asked the question.
I didn't catch
because she had already said
response, so I can't say. I don't think that. I mean, are they more reliable? Yes, they're more reliable in that we know their bad intentions. We do know, and they're going to treat us, in a way that smacks of elite capture and all this. That we know that is actually, it's much more predictable to deal with China because we know what their game is. With the U.S., we don't, because it changes every day. So in a sense, yeah, it's not wrong to say they're more reliable, but they're reliably bad.
Okay, I disagree, but I understand what you're saying. Stuart, what are your thoughts on Carney saying that China's more predictable and reliable partner for Canada?
Yeah, and I don't think that was a mistake because we had a reporter on that plane. The first thing that happened when they got to Beijing was actually Anita Anand got off the plane and said, China's stable and predictable. And then Melanie Joly said it the next day. And then Carney was asked about it, and he said, yes, stable and predictable. So the question is, who was the audience of that statement? Were they trying to say to the U.S., listen, if you guys could just get it together and be a little more stable, things would go a lot better? Or were they just genuinely saying what they were encountering when they got to China? Because I guess, Tasha is right that we know what we're getting with China. And I think when you make a deal there, nobody goes on Twitter and retracts it the next day. And I think that's the kind of thing that drives diplomats nuts. I think there was definitely an intention behind those words because the same words were used by all these different ministers and then Carney on that trip. So, maybe they're just sort of crying into the wind and hoping to change how the U.S. Governs itself.
Your statement that we know what we're getting reminds me of what a friend said about Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow. Well, we had John Tory as mayor, and we thought we were getting a conservative, and we got a communist. At least with Olivia Chow, we know we're getting a communist. a bit of an overstretch on both of them, but something Tasha can relate to as a Toronto resident. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about Greenland and whether the world was pulling out its hair unnecessarily over this, with claims of invasion and seniors taking up arms to go and defend it. More in moments.
In the time it takes us to say, we're using Folgers instant coffee, seamlessly blended with water and ice. A splash of whatever kind of milk is your thing. And gotta get that caramel drizzle. All to make a toasty, roasty, caramel iced coffee. You could be enjoying it. Every damn sip of it. Damn right. It's Folgers Instant.
This is Tristan Hopper, the host of Canada Did What?, where we unpack the biggest, weirdest, and wildest political moments in Canadian history you thought you knew and tell you what really happened. Stick around at the end of the episode to hear a sample of one of our favorite episodes. If you don't want to stick around, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get podcasts.
A letter to the editor of the Globe and Mail said that, as a 71-year-old, I'll go defend Greenland. A letter to the editor in Postmedia's own Victoria Times columnist said, said, stop the gun buyback program because we're going to need those to start militias to defend Canada. Here's my thing, folks, is that we need to stop pulling our hair out about Donald Trump. Listen to what he says, separate the noise from the signal, and figure out what he really wants. And we're not doing that. I'd love to hear from both of you. First off, I never thought that they were going to invade Greenland. I still don't think they're going to invade Canada, despite it was a Leger poll that said a third of Canadians believe he will. And yet that was the talk for weeks, even after the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and others had reported that Marco Rubio had briefed Congress that the plan was to try and purchase Greenland, a purchase offer that has been made 3 or 4 times over the last 175 years. And yet at Davos, before Davos, it was, should we send troops to Greenland? Are we going to send troops to Greenland? How many troops should we send to Greenland? I think the tell that Carney never believed that was a real threat is that we still participated in the NORAD exercises with the Americans in Greenland. Should we stop overreacting to everything Trump says and does, Stuart?
It's I'll admit it is hard, especially when you're a journalist and you cover it for the news. But I think the problem we have here is that Trump, through his real estate background, has developed this incredibly effective negotiating strategy, which is that you rattle people and you start with an offer that's way up here and then you come down and then you end up in a more favorable spot. And if it didn't work, people wouldn't be rattled, but people are. And I think the other problem we have in Canada is what I mentioned earlier, is there's a lot of incentives to rattle people from the Liberal Party. So I agree in theory with what you're saying, but in practice, it's hard to do. And I do think,
if we all know he's doing it, stop reacting and sit there and say, okay, what does he really want? Because several weeks ago, I said, I think what he wants is more say in Greenland, more military bases in Greenland. And I think that's where we're going to end up. Well, where did we end up?
I'll just say quickly that it is hard to know. And I do remember, I think we're in sort of a different era now in Trump's second term than we were in his first term. And I think
for sure,
people are still adapting to this. But when the tariff threats were flying around in December, I remember speaking to people close to both Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau months later who said that neither of those two men took the tariff threats very seriously at all. And I think, it's hard to remember these things. News is a bit of a blur, but I think that I kind of thought they were empty threats until they actually happened. And that, I think, is the trouble with Trump, is that the one time that you say, he's clearly bluffing, that might be the time that you get smacked in the head.
I think Stuart hit the nail on the head when you said, Stuart, this is how he does the deal, right? He's treating the world like a real estate market. The problem is you can't do that. This is not building another tower in Midtown Manhattan. This is dealing with the lives of 57,000 people who live in Greenland. And treating a country like a real estate deal, you're neglecting the fact that there are a million political and personal feelings that enter into the equation. You simply cannot do that. And he's doing that.
But he's doing it.
Yeah, I know he's doing it because that's how he runs things, right? But what I'm saying is that it's not effective. Can I finish?
Mark Carney.
It's not effective because when you do that, you stir up all the antipathy unnecessarily, not just there, but around the world. There are other actors. It's not like you're just dealing with the real estate board of New York City to get your tower built. You're dealing with all these other countries now who are going to freak out, and the people in Greenland who freak out, naturally freak out, because this is not how the world has done business. And, Trump can want to do business this way, but he also alienates people. And, he doesn't care that travel from Canada to the U.S. is down by a third, and that Las Vegas is now hotels offering deals at par because they're desperate to have customers, and people are negatively impacted by what he's doing. He doesn't care. He doesn't see that. He just sees his art of the deal. And he could have gotten more say in Greenland by using honey and not vinegar, but that's not his style. But here's the problem, is that using so much vinegar, you're going to basically dissolve all these relationships that you used to have and make people turn against your country in other ways that you may not foresee. So, he thinks it's great to be a bull in a china shop. I personally think it's obnoxious, but apart from obnoxious, I also think it's ineffective ultimately, because at some point, you're right, he cries wolf all the time. People are going to stop taking him seriously. And when they stop taking you seriously as a leader, that's where things can get iffy. And I think that his Norway thing was part of that too. People are now saying the guy's just mad, and what's the point? Let's just get together over here and ignore what he's doing, which may not be a bad thing.
To quote Mark Carney, we have to take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And the simple fact is, this is how he is acting. This is how he's going to keep acting. So pulling out our hair, overreacting, and pretending like France is going to somehow defend Norway or Greenland. I love the statement that in a sure sign that Greenland will surrender to Trump, France is now sending troops. France is not going to defend anyone. That is not going to happen. And look, half of this started because Jake Tapper, in what I thought was a good interview with Stephen Miller, the whole idea that they're going to invade Greenland started because Jake Tapper said, will you rule out military intervention? And he said, no, we're not going to rule out anything. But come on, no one's going to fight us militarily for Greenland. And that became, they're going to invade Greenland. No, that was not explicitly said at the beginning, and then it became a talking point, and then both sides overreact. And I'm just sitting there saying, why are we overreacting to the musings of Stephen Miller? And the whole world went nuts. People giving themselves ulcers, thinking that there's a war starting when that was never going to happen. And that's what I mean, and that we overreact to Trump, and he benefits from it.
I'll just say, too, this is something I notice in my life, which is I'm 42, so I feel like I'm right in the middle of the two generations that were important in the last election. The younger voters who tended to go towards, especially young men, going towards Polyev, and in general being less worried about the Trump threat. And then the sort of older voters who worried about the Trump threat to the exclusion of everything else. And I start most of my days in a suburban McDonald's with a cup of coffee, just listening to the old timers talking, and all they talk about is Donald Trump. And it's such an interesting insight into the psychology of what's happening right now in Canada. And I think the trouble with Trump is that he is, no matter what he's doing, whether it's dark or whether it's something else, it is entertaining. It is a reality show that you can watch. You can put on CNN and you can watch it for 8 hours and you will be entertained by that. And even if you are sort of viewing it in the terms of like fear and outrage, at its heart, they are enjoying watching the show. And I think that's probably the big problem with the Trump thing as a whole.
My mother's Facebook feed, we were on a trip together recently, and she kept scrolling for a Facebook feed, and it was late night comic after late night comic talking about Trump and her whole news feed. And I'm like, You know what I liked about being in California for 2 weeks over Christmas? Nobody talked to me about Trump unless I talked to a Canadian. I went to America to escape Trump, and I'll gladly do it again because he lives in the heads of Canadians rent-free in a way that I don't think is healthy.
Well, he lives in the heads of Minnesotans, too. He lives in the heads of in Maine. I disagree. I think it depends where you are in the U.S. And I think, I have friends who spend time in Florida, and they go there to escape the Trump talk, too. There are parts of the country where you won't hear it. There are other parts you will. And I think that it strikes a chord with Canadians because, he's the president of the United States. We feel we have to take him seriously, but it's also a frustration because we thought we were making progress and now we're not. And I think this started actually with Doug Ford. I'll throw him into the mix because some people are saying, well, it's hypocritical to praise Carney for his provocation when dumping on Doug Ford for his ads that he ran, if you remember, not that long ago. His ads with using Ronald Reagan and trying to tell the Americans that we need to deal with them and they need to deal with us. And Trump took this very personally, and the negotiations fell apart after that. And Carney wasn't happy, and he had told Ford not to do that. So, I've been on record
He never told them before the ads ran.
No, but I was on record saying that these ads were a bad idea. I thought that they were unnecessary because they came out of nowhere. This is different. What Carney did is different because Trump has already been in everyone's consciousness because of Greenland, because of all these things. So it feels like a more appropriate time to respond to this and say, enough's enough. We're just fed up. And I agree he lives rent free in our heads, Brian, but that's because we live right next door to the US. We are the mouse. They're the elephant. Now we're the mouse that roared. So I say good on us. Honestly, I think a lot of people just, while this may have repercussions, obviously on our relationship, they feel like, thank you for saying this because so many people wanted to say it but couldn't or didn't dare, and Carney did.
Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre's response. In fact, let's play a little clip of that right now. Here is what the leader of the official opposition had to say.
Prime Minister Carney's well-crafted and eloquently delivered speech at Davos has been widely noted, and I want to start by offering my own praise. The Prime Minister is right to restate what many have said for years. Canada must become more self-reliant, less dependent, and work with like-minded countries to advance our interests. And Conservatives are, as always, willing to work with him to turn these words into results. What stood out most to me was when he pointed out, quote, the gaps between rhetoric and reality. That's especially true here at home. If liberal words and good intentions were tradable commodities, Canada would already be the richest nation on earth.
Took a couple days for this response to come out, and then when he did, Poilievre saying, good things about the speech, but what have you done for me lately? What are you actually accomplishing for Canada? I think it's a valid criticism, but I'm not sure that in a war of words between between Mark Carney and Donald Trump, that Pierre Poilievre matters.
Yeah, that's the fundamental problem for Pierre Poilievre is the last election landscape was extremely unfavorable to him. And right now, I think we're seeing the best he can do, which is to say, yeah, it's a good speech, but Canadians have seen a lot of good speeches, so maybe we need to see something. And I think that's probably the best criticism of Carney, which is that he's got a lot of grand ambitions. He wants to do pipelines and major projects and deals with Trump and all this stuff that's apparently on the way, but hasn't arrived yet. And I think there will be a point where Canadians start to go, well, is this guy just flying around giving speeches, or is this stuff actually happening? And I think for Poilievre, it's not a good time for him. And that's probably why, if you're a Liberal, you're thinking about a spring election because, time is good for Poilievre. Time is probably bad for Mark Carney. So I think the speech is about the best you can do if you're a Conservative, but I don't think he's going to be getting a lot of headlines from it.
Yeah, I think that Poilievre started off this speech. He tried to mitigate the usual criticism that he has, which is that he's just opposing and he's dumping on Carney regardless of whatever he says. And he came out, at the beginning and said, well, it's, the Carney Carney wasn't. It wasn't all bad. Basically, what he was doing, he was putting things in the window that need to be addressed, but he's not addressing them, and we are the people to address them. And then he went on for like 13 minutes in this address. Carney's was 18 at the World Trade Forum, ironically. Poilievre's was 13 minutes, saying about how these are, the issues in Canada that are going unaddressed, and things like groceries and inflation and cost of living and all these legitimate things. And my understanding, the Conservatives are going to be hammering those nails in constantly, and that is they're going to stay on that message because it does resonate with their electorate. I mean, Pierre Poilievre would never even gone to the WEF, right? He said that specifically. He would never let his ministers go there. He wouldn't have even been on stage. So people who like that kind of idea, that it's great that we boycott these kind of elitist high-profile events, will be like, yeah, Pierre, you're right? And this will resonate with them. But there are a lot of the people, Stuart was referencing, the older people in particular, who think that these institutions still matter, or want Canada to be on the world stage, who will say, nah, that doesn't do it for me. Plus, they're not in the same economic bucket. They're not hurting as much. And they'll say, no, I like what Carney had to say. So I don't think Poilievre will win anyone over with his remarks. I think he's speaking to his base. And I think that people will, those people will still be there. But in terms of that other voter base and switcher voters, especially boomer voters, I don't think that he would have convinced any one of those people to switch back to him.
Looking at the latest polling from Abacus, which has dropped a couple of big polls over the past couple of days, doing deep dives into where the Conservative vote is, where the Liberal vote is. You're looking at accessible voter pools. The Liberals, 53% of the population say that they would consider voting for the Liberals. 48% say they would consider voting for the Conservatives. And it's 34% for the NDP. Surprising for me that the NDP is that high, considering they got. So did they even make it to double digits nationally? I know in Ontario they were below 5%. I don't think they made double digits nationally. I'd have to double check on that. But Poilievre's party is still doing well, except with those older voters. And you look, and it's what's the gender gap? Well, 45% say they would vote Conservative among men. 40% say they would vote Liberal. Among women, it's 32% for the Conservatives. 43% would vote Liberal. Over 60, 50% for the Liberals, 36% for the Conservatives. 45 to 59, 41% Liberal, 36% Conservative. The Conservatives only end up on top among people below 45.
Stuart.
So, yeah.
Yeah, well.
But I mean, regionally doing well in Ontario, doing well in British Columbia, where they're competitive at least. Not bad in Atlantic Canada, considering how strong the Liberals are out there. But it doesn't seem like this is, if we did go to a spring election, that this would be a position where they could win.
The thing that I think is worth noting with Pierre Poilievre's reaction to Carney's speech is that not just the substance, but also it didn't come out until Thursday evening. Yeah. Carney gave the speech 2 days before that, more than 2 days before that. So I think that the Conservatives are looking at these numbers. I know there's a fear in that party that what if we hit a ceiling in April? What if that's as far as we can go? And without the NDP, that's just it for us. They're looking at boomer men who are becoming more unattainable and who seem to have, some Conservatives have told me, there seems to be a personal thing with Pierre Poilievre where, the Liberal attack about how he's only ever been a politician really resonates with those older men, like this guy never had a real job. And that's
this
why
used to be the most reliable demographic for the Harper Conservatives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they did that.
Even for Andrew Scheer and Erin O'Toole, they did well with that demographic.
Yeah, it's partly a Poilievre thing. I'd say it's a small part of it is a Poilievre thing, and part of it is a structural situation with Trump. And that's why they did that ad in April last year with the two men golfing and kind of talking in, Stephen Harper supporter kind of ways. And the other voter pool that they may be swinging for there is either boosting the young men, which they're kind of maxing that out as it is, but women are going more to the Liberals and to the progressive side. That is like a structural problem across the whole West, that there's ideological polarization between men and women. Men are leaning a little bit to the right. Women are going much farther to the left. And that's just something, it's a phenomenon you see everywhere.
Yeah, I was seeing polling on that in the United States the other day, and the graph that was put up showed men bouncing up and down. So there's a line in the center showing the middle, and men were bouncing up and down around the line, and women were for years and years. And then the past 5 to 10 years, it's a 20-point swing towards very liberal positions.
Yeah, and every conservative I know has seen that chart. So I can imagine being in the Conservative Party and feeling a little bit of despair at those numbers and the sort of structural changes that are swimming against them. So I think that's maybe why you see when Pierre Poilievre takes 2.5 days to respond to a simple speech in Davos, it's because they're a little bit paralyzed by the situation they face.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a simple speech. It was a deep and complex speech. I like what Michael Covert said. He said it was best speech he'd read in a long time. It was very powerful, but also dark subtext that he's very concerned about and would have to think about. And that's kind of where I landed on it. Tasha, as you look at these numbers, and what do you think of the Conservative chances? Now we'll talk quickly about the upcoming convention in Calgary, but I mean, do the Conservatives, how do they find their way out of this wilderness? I mean, nationally, they're doing well. Some regional numbers, they're doing well, but still not a coalition that could win.
Yeah, it is tricky because, the dark days ahead speeches, actually, conservatives have often played more on fear than liberals. And this is a reversal, in a way, of that usual dynamic. The conservatives are not usually the sunny ways, happy days party. And in fact, they're not on things like the economy at all. They're look how bad it is. And Poilievre has been talking about this for years now, about the fact the younger generation can't get a break, etc. So I think this is the issue. Those men you're talking about, those older men, I think it's a comfort factor too. They look at Carney and they're like, you're like me, like someone who looks and thinks like me. As opposed to Poilievre, who has a different personality, different style. He appeals to younger people in the way he presents himself on social media. It's more abrasive. It's not what an older generation is used to from their political leaders, and it smacks of Trump. Many of his tactics look very much the same. So that older generation, I think the older men they have a disconnect with him on that too. And Harper was not like that, and the times were different too. But Harper, first of all, didn't have a Trump to deal with. But second, Harper was, he presented in a way people could relate to too. His politics were more conventional than Poilievre's are. So
he had a far right hidden agenda. We heard all about it.
Well, the left said that, but I think many men didn't necessarily. That wasn't something that hit home with that cohort of voters. I think with hardcore liberal voters, NDP voters, absolutely, they didn't like it. It hit home with women because the hard right agenda implies, things on abortion. That was the issue. I think a lot of men, maybe that issue doesn't resonate as much with them. And, I would understand that. It's not as personal to them. So I think this is to answer how he gets out of this is tricky. I don't know if I have a full answer. I think the Conservatives need to see where do they need to diversify their base while still hewing true to the principles they have. Can they do that? And I think it's more a style thing, to be honest, than what they're selling. And the style has to change. Poilievre said he won't change, though. So if he's still going to be that abrasive guy, that's going to play against him in an era of Trump.
I remember being on the campaign trail with Stephen Harper, and I believe it was a stop in Brampton. No, it was a stop in Brampton because he invoked the late former Premier of Ontario, Bill Davis, when he said, boring is good. And Stephen Harper bored his way into a majority, and he did. And when he won that majority, it wasn't just with older men. The plurality of women also voted for the Conservatives in 2011. And there was the Liberals ended up with the real gender gap, not the Conservatives. Okay, so quick roundup. How do we think the convention will go? I have been pretty steadfast in saying that Poilievre will get over 70%. He'll be fine. That's what I have been saying. And here we are a week out, a few days away, and I'm not sure now.
Wow. I have been trying to find a conservative who will say below 80, and I can't find them.
Oh, yeah, I
So,
do not think and have never thought he'll get below or above 80.
You don't think
Oh,
he'll get
really?
above
I've
80?
been saying I think above 70.
Wow. That's low.
But
To me, that's
yeah.
low. I was thinking
Maybe I'm
above
just
80.
talking to Kool-Aid drinkers.
Having looked at these things in the past, I've always said between 70 and 80, he's fine. But hey, I got Bonnie Crombie wrong in Ontario for the Ontario Liberals. Jason Kenney I got wrong. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe Poilievre won't get above. If he doesn't get above 70, I think he's toast. But where do you guys think he'll land?
Someone told me, Brian. So I've been thinking. I've just been hearing above 80, and maybe I'm just talking to Kool-Aid drinkers, and that's why. But you've got a little over 800 delegates going, about 100 from Quebec. So you can start to see the math of how the regional game might play against him a little bit. But the other thing that I know is that if there's anything Pierre Poilievre will put all of his energy into, it's something like this. And this isn't boomers in Toronto he has to convince. This is conservatives. So I feel like it's 80. I know a lot of conservatives. This is not based on reporting. This is based on conservatives' deepest, darkest fears. But a lot of them are worried about some new floor crossing being announced the day after or 2 days after he gets his leadership review. So even if he does well, they'll still find something else to be fearful about.
The folks I've been speaking to about floor crossing and this is going back weeks now, based on how Chris d'Entremont went, where even he was surprised that his floor crossing was announced because he didn't realize he was on the record, and how others disappeared, Matt Genereux, that the Liberal plan had been, if there were more floor crossers, they would do them immediately and not try and orchestrate them. And we haven't seen any, so I'm not sure that any will happen. Tasha, your thoughts on how Poilievre does at the convention, and will we see the floor crossers? Is there some grand plan? Everyone thinks politics is filled with really smart people, like in West Wing, and you always have to remind them: more Veep, less West Wing.
So I think I've not been paying rapt attention to the 70, 80, or 90. I had heard over a week ago, so maybe it's still now, over 80. But to me, over 70 is not a success. If he gets under 80, I think that's not, I've been on record saying, I think under 90 is not, it would be nice if he had 90 and above, ring endorsement. Then the floor crossing happens.
Saddam Hussein level.
No, but then I said 80. Under 80, he's in trouble, in my view, in Calgary. If this was happening in Toronto or Montreal, but it's his home base. People are going to be there from there. People from the Atlantic are not necessarily going to go. It's awfully cold. It's expensive. I've heard that from people in Atlantic Canada. They're not even bothering. So I think that's a problem. I will say on the floor crossing, though, that I've heard also these rumors. However, I think that the fact we think he may be setting up an election as a plan B indicates that maybe those floor crossers aren't out there. And he can't get the majority because that little parade's not happening. So they're saying, okay, let's forget about plan A. Let's go to plan B, set up an election. If plan A happens, great. If it doesn't, well, we've got something else in the hopper. So I am not as set on floor crossing or seeing floor crossers as I am on the plan B scenario maybe playing out.
Well, we know that they were courting floor crossers because Scott Anderson, the Conservative from Vernon Lake Country, Monashee in British Columbia, I had to look up the full name of the riding. Both he and Lori Eidlot from Nunavut, she's a New Democrat, said, yes, we were approached. And they both said that, no, they're not going to do it. Anderson was adamant he's not doing it. And Eidlot was like, well, like I've talked to people and maybe one day, possibly.
So yeah, they've been trying, but yeah, I think I agree with you. The fact that they appear to be prepping or laying the groundwork for an election. The things that people don't realize about politics is there's always like 15 different things going on, planning for different scenarios. And just because we say, well, looks like they might be planning for an election and then the election doesn't happen, doesn't mean that they weren't planning for it. It means that something else may have happened that changed their mind. It's like, trying to get rid of Melanie Jolie because she's a pain in your butt and they don't like her. And then Stephen Guilbeault resigns from cabinet, and then you're like, ooh, but maybe we still need Melanie now for the Quebec thing.
Maybe Pablo Rodriguez will come back. Just kidding. He needs a job.
I don't think he'd be welcome.
He needs a job now.
All right, guys, thanks so much. We'll reconvene, I'm sure, in a month or so and see how our predictions went. But thanks for the time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad.
Full Comment is a Postmedia podcast. My name's Brian Lilly. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please hit subscribe, leave us a review, a comment, share this with your friends and family on social media. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
Here's that clip from Canada Did What? I Promised You. 2 years later, he was still opposition leader, and he lost again to the Pearson Liberals. Despite this, Diefenbaker doesn't resign as leader of the Progressive Conservatives, which put the party in an awkward situation that hasn't really happened before. The typical rules of a Canadian political party were that you stayed leader until you died or resigned. And if you lost twice in a row, you were supposed to do the honorable thing and step aside. But Diefenbaker just didn't, prompting the party to take the unprecedented step of forcing a party convention in Toronto for the singular purpose of crowbarring Diefenbaker out of the leadership. Diefenbaker shows up, pretends everything is fine, and gives a finger-wagging speech chastising his fellow party members for their disloyalty.
I followed this party when I didn't agree with policies. And I gave loyalty to leader after leader, because I believe that there is no other way.
He's politely cheered by the assembled Conservatives and then abjectly humiliated in their subsequent leadership vote. On the first ballot, Diefenbaker gets a distant 5th place, and even then he refuses to admit defeat. If you want to hear the rest of the story, make sure you subscribe to Canada Did What? Everywhere you get your podcasts.